Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you all for coming back and joining us in this conversation.
Absolutely.
So Tim, I'm gonna turn to you first. DEI has become the buzzword of the year. It's been used as an epithet, and maybe I think it's fair to say it's even been used as a slur. Paint a picture about how these attacks on DEI have gained so much traction, not just among the MAGA Republicans, but among the mainstream. How has this happened?
Well, first, let's be very clear about just how ubiquitous this has become, because in a lot of ways, DEI is the way that folks on social media say the N-word without saying it now, right? I mean, that's ultimately...
Say that so the people in the back of the room can hear.
Yeah, I mean, it is literally the new N-word for people who don't want... I mean, not that Elon would actually boot them off of X for saying the N-word, but they're still using it that way. And so you hear it, you hear this conversation about Vice President Harris being a DEI vice president because, unlike, I guess, Sarah Palin, she didn't have the qualifications to run the country should something happen to the president. And, we know here in Baltimore, right, when the barge hit that bridge and it fell down, the mayor of this city was referred to as a DEI mayor, because we all know that if the mayor had been white, he would have had these magical white man superpowers that would have somehow fortified the bridge against all potential accident. And then we have a Boeing jet, I can't remember which airline it was, but the door blew out of the plane, right? And then immediately you had folks on social media talking about, well, that's because the airline has a DEI policy to recruit black pilots, because we all know pilots install the doors in the planes. So this was all just a way of saying these efforts are about lowering merit, lowering quality, and Elon Musk is why, in a lot of ways, this has become so popularized. He is the wealthiest man on the planet. He has a huge reach on the platform that he owns, and for weeks after that, he was saying DEI equals DIE, because that's just clever. That's just clever. This is a guy who thinks DEI lowers merit, and yet he gave us the Cybertruck, which, if you haven't seen it, if that's about merit, that is like a trash compactor on wheels. and that's what he thinks merit is. This is, I mean, at least I will say this about Elon, and we should at least acknowledge, this is apparently the one unqualified African American that we can find in this country. and it suggests that we really do need to rethink our immigration policies, because South Africa is not sending their best. I think we all know that.
And of course, I love the response of the mayor when he says DEI means duly elected incumbent.
Right.
So speaking of duly elected incumbent, Justin, let me turn to you. So we know So we know that what we're seeing now on the national stage is just a reflection of what's been happening locally, and particularly what's been happening in Tennessee, which you have called and we have elevated that Tennessee is the tip of the spear. So paint a picture for us about what is happening in Tennessee that we are seeing the reflection of on the national stage.
Definitely. Well, first of all, a lot of people know about what happened to us because of the Tennessee Three, but our story really starts in 1873 when the first black lawmaker was sworn into the Tennessee House of Representatives. It goes to 1887 when the last black lawmakers would serve until the 1960s. It goes to 1866 when the KKK was founded in our state. It goes to 1960 when students like Diane Nash and John Lewis and Bernard Lafayette and C.T. Vivian sat down as a way to rise up against Jim Crow inequality. It goes to 1970 when members of the General Assembly put a KKK statue in our state capitol. In 1978, a statue of the first KKK Grand Wizard in our state capitol. And so what it means to work in the Tennessee legislature is to work in a building where we ban books, we ban black history. They even try and ban black lawmakers, but a building where they refuse to ban the weapons of war that are terrorizing our kids in school and terrorizing our communities. These assault rifles that we saw take the lives of 3 9-year-olds and 3 adults last year in Nashville. What it means to work in the Tennessee General Assembly is to work in a building where my first week I'm on the elevator with State Senator Jack Johnson, and his welcome to me is to say, unsolicited, without any introduction, I just want you to know that you're worthless. and you don't belong here. But the truth is, I thank Senator Johnson because what he showed me was that he gave me clarity that I'm not here in this building to make friends. I have friends, but we're here to make change. And if that means disrupting, I say that it also means that democracy requires disruption. It requires doing things out of the ordinary. It requires not asking for permission. It requires letting them know that when they want us to apologize as they wanted us to do when we were expelled, that we let them know that they can do whatever they want, but we're going to put them on trial and refuse to be bowed because we stand in a lineage of liberation that requires our action now, because so much of what we're seeing in Tennessee, by saying this, is that in my state, 1 in 5 black men cannot vote because of felony disenfranchisement, but we have somebody convicted of multiple felonies on our ballot. I mean, this is the absurdity of what we're seeing in Tennessee. And so just like the KKK has children, their names are Governor Bill Lee. George Wallace has children, their names are Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the House. Their names are William Lambert, their names are Marsha Blackburn. We also are the children of Diane Nash and John Lewis and Bernard Lafayette, and we're not gonna let you take us back in history.
So, Attorney General Ellison, turning to you, I want you to add to the picture that we're painting. What are some of the snapshots? What are some of the notable cases, some of the notable developments that are emblematic of the assault on racial justice and its relationship to the deterioration of our democracy?
Well, thanks for asking, and Netroots Nation, love you guys. Thank you guys all the time. So I think one of the most important things to keep in mind now is that where we are is not where they want to take us. This thing has an arc. It's headed somewhere, and we really need to counter their move. So we know in 2013, Shelby County. What county is that in? Tennessee, right? Yeah.
You have a Shelby County.
Yeah. And so we know that, the Voting Rights Act severely gutted. Then we have Citizens United. Then we have the affirmative action cases just recently. We have the Dobbs decision. Together with that, we have 17 attorneys general, Republicans, sending a letter to the top 100 corporations that if you have a DEI program, we might just sue you. We have ESG, energy, sustainability, and governance programs being attacked, even in the corporate community. We have the Disneyfication of corporate America. Now, many of us in this room want to control corporate power, as we should. But don't be blind to the fact that these people, what corporate America is doing is not racist enough for them. Right. And so where is this headed? I think it is reasonable, rational to know that they're trying to resegregate our country the way it was before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Yep. It won't be exactly how it was, but it could be very, very similar. So for example, right now, if you look at a case called 303 Creative, which is Jim Crow segregation for gay people now, right now, it is legal to say we don't serve you people. It's premised on, like, the First Amendment, freedom of expression, establishment clause. I can imagine a 2027 decision that says, if you don't want to serve blacks, Asians, Latinos, Jews, whoever, then you don't have to, because to do so would be in violation of your right to free expression. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, this is on the way because it is very well funded. Nobody at this convention should leave without hearing the name of Leonard Leo. If you don't know who it is, ask the person who next to you who was just snapping their fingers. This is a real-life supervillain who helped fund trips and vacations and all kinds of stuff for the likes of Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas and people like that. He's literally spent millions of dollars, and maybe we'll end up spending as much as over $1 billion at changing the judiciary, because these people know that most people are against the ideas they stand for. True or false, most people believe that guns should have background checks if you're gonna have one, right? Most people believe women should be able to control their own bodies. Most people. I'm not talking about just us fine progressives. I mean, most people everywhere. Most people hold these views, but the Leonard Leo people do not hold these views. In fact, they're adamantly hostile to these views, so they cannot rely on just democracy. Democracy is their enemy. They need to control counter-majoritarian institutions like the Supreme Court in order to impose a set of rules on our society and simultaneously gin up the street racist movement in parallel, so that they can have terrorism and hostility on the ground and segregation ideas from above the Supreme Court to bring us to a society in a few years, their goal, which is some mix of A Handmaid's Tale and the new Jim Crow. And the righteous, courageous people in this room are the ones who know that we must fight this and stop this, and we gotta have a plan to do it. So you are in the very right place you need to be at the Netroots 2024, because you guys are who I'm counting on to counter this wicked plan.
And so Keith, if I may, so you've laid out how this rollback of anti-discrimination law has been made possible through the takeover of the courts. You've rolled out how dark money has been used to basically buy Supreme Court justices. We've seen how the weakened commitment to a multiracial democracy is actually dismantling some of the primary laws that have been in place to ensure that we have a multiracial democracy. And yet, the response to the problem has been tepid. And yet we hear it doesn't poll well. Yet we hear, let's pivot away rather than stand and fight. What is this telling us about where the crisis is right now?
Well, one thing it's telling us for sure is that mainstream media is actually a corporate entity that is falling in line with this dominant narrative. So if you are relying on your inspiration from MSNBC or CNN, you are looking in the wrong place. It means that the narrative and the story that we follow is the one where inclusion, diversity, and all of us in and have opportunity is the right story. And we have to take responsibility for moving that story forward with the means of communication we have together. We have to say that the story, that as they push racism, we have to push solidarity. We have to say that as they push division and try to get the people who were born here to be suspicious of the people who just came, to get men suspicious of women, to get straight people suspicious of LGBTQ people, as they are pushing this narrative, we've got to self-generate our own narrative about solidarity and inclusion and how our society is better off with us together. The fact is that they are very aggressively doing this. As a matter of fact, I mean, if you look at the way that CRT and the 1619 Project have just been attacked, and that the mainstream media has coalesced with this, you know that the forces that are trying to trick us into believing that division is best are at work in the corporate structure of corporate America as well. They are there, and they know, and these 17 AGs who sent this letter to these top Fortune 100 companies, they know that their commitment to inclusive America was never that deep, always somewhat tepid, and now and it doesn't take that much to intimidate them into just giving it up. This is why 23 of us Democratic attorneys general sent a letter back saying that you must have this program, and that we will defend you if these bullies try to attack you. We've got to be, And this is why, you know, we have to create institutions to defend ESG. We have to create these institutions ourselves. There's nobody else who's going to get them. But the good news is that the creativity, the energy, the artistry, and the technology for all of this is well within this room. It's right here. But I'll just close by saying this, Kim, you have really led the way for us. You've laid out a blueprint with CRT. We want to all thank you for that. And I just want to say that everybody in this room or everybody touching anyone in this room, we need a massive wave of racial solidarity, human solidarity on all fronts to counter this wave. They are taking us in a certain direction, and trust me, you don't want to land where they're trying to take you. It will be a nightmarish country for literally everyone, unless you're Elon Musk. I'll stop by saying the number one group whose mortality numbers are getting much worse are white, non-college men over 50. So racism really hurts everyone. We know it hurts people of color, but it doesn't really do most people very much good at all.
So thank you, Keith. So one of the reasons that the anti-DEI mobilization has been so effortlessly rolled out and effective is because the first step was to eliminate the ability to talk about structured inequality. Critical race theory is all about challenging the assumptions that color blindness, traditional institutional practices are fair and equitable. You take out CRT and all you have is bean counting. All you have is, oh, we're just giving you a leg up because of the color of your skin rather than the historical way in which you've been situated. So these two are hand in hand. Another part of that, though, and I'm coming to you for this, Justin, is the writing off of the spaces where the conflict is most is sharpest. We spent some time together in the House floor at Tennessee with the dreaded red book together, the CRT book. So talk to us about being in the eye of the storm in this war on woke. What is it to be in the thick of this fight, and also for the fight to be written off by too many allies who say, we can afford to let Tennessee go. They can write themselves off, let them succeed. So speak to us from inside that space.
Definitely. Well, first of all, I want to just say, because I didn't say this at the beginning, it's kind of intimidating when you are on a panel of people who you look up to, who have informed your praxis, your activism, because I also work in a building where we don't have folks who believe in that intergenerational movement. You know, being the youngest black lawmaker, being the youngest Democratic lawmaker, I was told my first term to be silent. And my mom said, you didn't go there to be an intern, you need to speak up for your district. You need to be heard. And so the first thing is that I work in a building where, I have to be honest, too many of my Democratic colleagues have fallen into the politics of accommodationism and gradualism and silence as complicity. And that's why when you saw us get expelled, we have 24 members of our caucus, but only 3 of us went to the well to fight for those kids and to fight for those students in the gallery. We cannot bow down. You know, when you go into, particularly in a state like Tennessee, you're told that you are in the minority party. And I said, you know, I like the term they use in England better. No, we are the opposition party. We are here to oppose you with every tool at our disposal, to create roadblocks, speed bumps, whatever we can, to hold up signs to your committee room where you have to pass new house rules. They passed how many house rules? They keep changing the house rules. I don't even know what the house rules are anymore, but because of this picture, they passed a rule that you can't even hold paper signs in committee anymore because they wouldn't call on me, so I held up a sign to let the voice of what we were saying be heard. And so it requires doing things to say that your rules are being weaponized as a tool of white supremacy to silence dissent, even though Article 2, Section 27 of the state constitution of Tennessee says that every lawmaker has a right to dissent from and protests against legislation that they find injurious to the people and to have their protests marked in the Journal of the House. I took that seriously when I read that constitution and when I took that oath. And so that is what we're doing. And so to work in the midst of the storm means to be unapologetic and to also say to people across this nation that the South is worth fighting for. A lot of people are talking about Project 2025. Well, let me tell you a secret. If you want to look at what Project 2025 is, look at Tennessee 2024.
Right.
Look at what it means to work in a state that has silenced any dissent, that has terrified and terrorized our professors and our teachers in our schools, that have made librarians afraid to see what books they can have, that has removed anybody qualified from our state government, and it's all the speaker's cronies. Look at what's happening in Tennessee, and you'll see what is coming to this nation, which is why we have to fight it in the South. We have to fight it on their terrain and not cede anything. Because the South, W.E.B. Du Bois says, that, so goes the South, as goes the nation. The South has been a heartbeat for social change from Reconstruction to the Civil Rights Movement, and it's our time again. And the truth be told is that they use our states as laboratories. They use our state houses as laboratories. We were the first state to pass a ban on drag shows, to pass these divisive concepts bans, to pass voter ID, the most restrictive form of voter ID, the most restrictive anti-abortion law. We are leading the way, and they're testing it out in our state. And then our Attorney General, who we don't have an honorable Attorney General, we have somebody who does not believe in multiracial democracy, does not believe in the rights of the transgender community, does not believe in interfaith work, who is an extremist Christian nationalist, who is very polite, but puts on the veneer of respectability, but it has the same outcome of racial terror that we saw in 1866 that the Klan was trying to do in our state.
Right.
And so you can be nice and polite, but that's not what we're here to do. We're here to fight you if your policies are violent to our community.
That's right.
And so,
right.
I'll just end by saying this, is that we need solidarity in the South. Sometimes I go on social media and people say, well, we should just let the South leave. And do you not know that the majority of black people in this nation live in the South?
Right.
Do you not know that the South is also our home too? Do you not know that they're repressing us so hard in the South because there's so much revolution to quell in the South? Because if we come together as a multiracial community, we will reclaim these state houses. Do you know they have to cheat their way into power? So they use felony disenfranchisement and gerrymandering and voter suppression because they cannot win in the South? Don't give up on us. Show up and fight with us and invest in the South. That's what we're asking you to do.
Right. That's right. Right. That's right.
And let me just say, I had the honor of accompanying Justin walking through the halls of Tennessee, and we looked at the iconography along all of the halls, right? All of these symbols of white Christian nationalism, all of those things that remain part of the heritage that have to always be there, while this is the same legislature that wants to erase the heritage of struggle that you talked about, that wants to erase the heritage of Reconstruction, that wants to elevate redemption and suppress the struggle for a true multiracial democracy. So when you sit in that contradiction and you contemplate the fact that some of these same people who wanted to erase racial justice under divisive concepts laws had nothing to say about what happened this week in Nashville. Can you just say a little bit about why we need to sit with that contradiction and blow it up?
I mean, just this past weekend, we had over 200 white nationalists from a group called Patriot Front marching through the streets of Tennessee in Nashville, broad daylight outside our Capitol, down to City Hall, down to Broadway, the tourist area, chanting "Deportation will save the nation" and "Sieg Heil" and all types of neo-Nazi rally chants. And just 3 months prior to that, we had another white nationalist group do the same thing. And the thing is that these groups are being given a call and response. You know, my colleagues in the legislature, when they fight to protect a statue of the KKK Grand Wizard put up in 1978, when they fight to elevate the history of Nathan Bedford Forrest and Andrew Jackson and all these Confederates, what they're doing is telling these white nationalist groups, come on and join us. You know, a lot of them have refused to condemn them because it's hard to condemn your family members and your colleagues who you go to church with and who live by you. I mean, that's the thing, is that we ask them to condemn this, but the truth is that they can't condemn what they are. That this is really the truth of what they are bringing in our state, because what we used to have is when we had this KKK statue, we fought to remove it because we said, how can we fight against these policies of white supremacy that are more sophisticated and subtle if we cannot remove this overt symbol of white supremacy that we have to walk by when we walk into the House chamber, that black children have to pass on their way to the Capitol? As one elder told me in Tennessee, a freedom rider, he said, you know, they took down the white and colored signs, but they put this up as a symbol to remind us that we're still not welcome in this building. And that's what we're dealing with. And so we must, lift up these contradictions and challenge them and fight them. And sometimes that means tearing them down. Sometimes that means climbing up and covering them, as we did in 2020, and saying that we will not wait for the politics of never, is what essentially it is, to stop this movement, but we will do what we have to do our own selves. And that means finding a way to get in the way, getting in good trouble, as John Lewis called it, being disruptive to these systems of white supremacy, and letting them know that these white nationalist groups are not going to have us hide in terror, but they're going to have us show up even stronger, and let them know that we're going to connect the dots between these photos you see of these folks who are throwing up Nazi salutes and putting up Confederate flags, to the people in suits, to the people who try and hide behind the veneer of respectability and enact these policies of white supremacy, that these groups, if you look at their agendas, are exactly the same. And so there's no difference between those who come with the overt symbols with those who try and hide it behind policy violence and policies and legislation and decorum, who then enact the same type of systems that we're fighting against from these white nationalist groups.
And we had a great conversation about this. For those who want to hear it, check out the latest episode of Intersectionality Matters. People won't know that we were talking at midnight after we visited Uncle Nearest, but it was a great conversation. And so one of the things about that conversation was we were talking about the conditions of possibility. What actually has been in play that allows this contradiction not only to gain the power of state law, but potentially to be federalized at the federal level. So these bans on so-called divisive concepts, the censorship, the effort to revise Title VII to prohibit the collection of racial data, this stuff is going down without much of a fight, Tim. So what is it that we need to understand that is that part of the call might be coming from inside the House?
Right. Well, I think the part that's important is, and Justin alludes to this, that there is nothing that reactionary neo-Confederates or the old school Confederates or racists in history have accomplished without the accommodation of our so-called allies. Those people who swear they are about something but are about nothing, right? And so if you look at the whole history of this country, right, every time in history you hear the term compromise, right, whether it's the 3/5 compromise, whether it's the Missouri compromise, whether it is, you just go down the list of all the time, the compromise of 1877. Every single time you hear the word compromise, guess whose interests are being compromised? Black folk, folks of color, in the interest of white power. And so the idea that we can somehow finesse our way around the racial justice conversation ignores the fact that we've seen this movie before. Everything that they are doing is out of the redemption playbook that destroyed Reconstruction. So we talk about rewriting history. That's what the Lost Cause narrative did. We talk about setting up statues of Confederate generals. Those were not set up in the immediate aftermath of the war. They were set up in the last couple of years of the 1800s and the first decade of the 1900s by people who wanted to whitewash, pun very much intended, the history of what they had been fighting for. Because during the war, they had no compunction. They said, we are fighting to maintain white supremacy and the enslavement of black people. And 30 years later, they're like, it doesn't sound so good. Let's change our narrative. But that's the same thing that's happening now. You have the state of Virginia, for instance, that just announced that they are recommending that in African-American history classes, they're taking out the words white supremacy entirely. They're replacing the word racism with discriminatory treatment, a much more passive kind of formulation. And the most important thing of all, everywhere they talk about actual victimization, they remove the word white from a description of the perpetrators, right? So in other words, we can't talk about who was doing the lynching, who was doing the enslaving, who was doing the segregating, whose power was being maintained. It's like we have victims and no perpetrators. These are people who want to weaponize colorblindness, but they're not colorblind at all. They see color. Color moves into their neighborhood, they sure as shit see it. Color comes into the bank to get a loan, they see it. Color goes to their children's school, they see it. Color comes into their corporate C-suites, they see it. What they don't see is the color of their own skin. They don't see whiteness, and they don't see the way that whiteness is operated. And so we have to decide that we are going to foreground racial justice and all of those things, because the way that, and I'm talking about nice white liberal folks now. I've been white a long time. I've been 55 years in this skin, and I come from the South, and just like Justin was saying, we hear these things, oh, let them go, let them secede, and a lot of nice white liberals from the North and the East and the West Coast think that shit is clever. It is not clever. It is a capitulation to racial injustice. You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared to do an Ann Braden, Southerner. You need to be prepared to do a Bob Zellner, Southerner. You need to be prepared to do a Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, Southerner. In other words, we have a history of white anti-racist solidarity. And I'm going to be honest with you, and we hadn't talked about me saying this, but Justin got me fired up, so I'm going to do what I have to do. Many years ago, I remember doing an event in LA, and there was a nice white progressive, because, you know, they got all kinds of nice white liberals in Los Angeles and all throughout California. And she comes up to me before a speech and she says, I think it's so great that you do this work and you're from the South. And I just looked at, my buddy was with me and he and I grew up together and he moved out there in '99, but he's from Nashville just like I am. And he looks at me and I look at him and he knew what I was gonna do and I'm gonna do it again in here. And some of y'all are not gonna like it, but I'm not here to make friends either. I looked at her and I said, you know, I gotta be honest, I don't trust any white people that aren't from the South. Or at least white people that don't have a connection to the South. Why do I say that? Because if you are white and you grow up in the South or you have people in the South, you know that race is the background noise of everything that happens in this country. But if you are white and you could be progressive as the day is long. You could certainly be a lot more progressive than some of my white compatriots in the southern states. You could vote the right way, quote unquote, every time. But if you don't have a connection to that history, you have the luxury of thinking that race is not the background noise of Portland, and it is. That it's not the background noise of Seattle, and it is. That it's not the background noise of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it is. That it's not the background noise of what happens in the Bay Area. I had a black man explain to me 30 years ago that San Francisco was the most racist town that he had ever been in his life. And when I said that, and I said it on Daily Kos, as a matter of fact, in 2011, I got attacked by people who came out of the woodwork saying, how dare I besmirch the good and progressive reputation of San Francisco? Because he didn't want to listen to black people's reality. We better start listening to black and brown folks' reality, because that is all that has ever saved us, and it is all that will ever save us in this country. So thank you for asking. Yes, thank you for asking.
I'm gonna give you the opportunity to put a punctuation on it. We know that the divisive concept bills that have been part of parents' rights, we know that Moms for Liberty is basically warmed over Daughters of the Confederacy. One of the main arguments is that telling this history, dealing with this history, well, it traumatizes their kids, right? And you're one to often say there are multiple histories.
Yeah.
So when you say that telling the history traumatizes their kids, you are confessing that there's a history that you don't know, or there's a history you don't want to be told, because white people have been on all sides of this. So what are the things that progressive parents, liberal allies, and people of color need to be prepared to say in the face of this effort to make our history unspeakable, so our present is illegible and a democratic future is unachievable?
Well, what we have to be willing to say is that, as you said, there are people that have been on, white folks have been on the right side of history too sometimes. We don't know their names. But if we taught their names, these white children that feel some kind of way about a lesson about racism wouldn't have to feel that way, because they would understand they could be John Fee, who was a Presbyterian minister, founder of Berea College, who was literally defrocked for refusing to minister to enslavers. You can be that guy, but not if you don't know about him. You can't be Ann Braden if you don't know about her. You can't be Bob Zellner if you don't know about him. If you don't learn that history, of course you're if the only white people that you learned about were the ones who did the deed and not the ones who resisted the deed, then yeah, you might feel a certain amount of guilt and shame, but that is not the entirety of what it is to live in this skin. And so we have to teach a different history. African American history, Latinx history, Asian American history, indigenous history is not just a history of those groups. It is a history of our group. And many of us have decided to fight in solidarity with those black and brown people. So we need to be telling children that, because then you let children know that they have a choice to make. They can choose collaboration and accommodation, or they can choose resistance. And that is why they don't want it taught. Because when those young people learn, see, all this happened now. CRT's been around for 40 years. right? DEI has been around for decades, and nobody even really talked about it. I mean, they did, but they didn't make a big fuss. All of a sudden, they made a fuss. Why? Because young people were in the streets, 20 million strong, after the killing of George Floyd, and it wasn't just black and brown young people. It was young white people. It was their children and their grandchildren, and these folks said, my God, if they learn about the history of injustice, they'll do what young people do, which is fight it, because young people have an innate sense of right and wrong. It's only when we get older that we wring that out of us, right? Young people react to injustice by fighting it. That's why they don't want it taught. We have to insist that it is our history too, and we're going to take our rightful place in it.
Absolutely. And you know what, while we're on the topic of appeasement, let's just point out that one of the things that 2020 made possible was the opportunity to actually teach Black history, the opportunity to create advanced placement course. And the initial course included these concepts that motivated so many young people, that put all those millions of people out. Ideas like structural racism, ideas like police misconduct isn't simply a product of a bad apple, but of structural racism. Ideas that were critical about race, based on a theory that we don't all have the same experience. Whenever you put your hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 o'clock when you're African American and you see that siren in the back, you are practicing a theory that your experience with this police encounter may not end well. That is what critical race theory is, and that is part of the reason why there was so much pressure from Ron DeSantis and so many others to take that critical content out of our courses. It wasn't just Ron DeSantis, but it was the AP, it was all of those institutions that said, if we want to get this in this market, we have to compromise. And as you pointed out, compromise is sacrifice, right? This is a moment where we cannot sustain that. So Keith, I want to come to you because so much of this is about law. So much of this is about using institutional power. We've seen how MAGA has used its attorney generals. You talked a little bit at the beginning about what your cohort can do, has done. What do we need to know about what's possible, and how can we support the efforts that you all are making?
Well, the main thing that we can do to support what DEMAGs are doing is for us to write, do poems, make art, speak up, confront this narrative that there's something bad or divisive about DEI. We've got to speak up for it, and we've got to understand that they need this racial division in order to move so many things forward in terms of their power. Let's not forget the famous quote by Lee Atwater. Y'all remember the one where he said, Lee Atwater, who was this movement Republican, big shot among Republicans, he was basically the person who taught Karl Rove, how to be racially divisive and crafty. And he said, look, and he's on tape saying this, you can see it yourself. He said, look, you know, back in the 50s, we used to say N-word, N-word, N-word. He didn't say N-word, he said the word. But then come around the 60s, you couldn't say that. We had to say busing. We had to say stuff like that. And then by the 70s, we're getting so abstract, we just say cut taxes, but everybody knows it means blacks will suffer more. Right. This is what movement Republican leader said, and it was part of something they called the Southern Strategy. So if they're not funding schools in your white town, their fundamental motive for doing so is they're going to maintain a racial hierarchy by doing it. Guns, on the other hand. You know, why do we have so many guns? Why, despite the fact that we have more mass shootings than days in the year, we won't do anything about guns, and the right wing fights it at every turn? It all has to do with this fear about black people, brown people doing something, and they must defend themselves against that. So this is why we push that, despite the fact that leading cause of white men over 50's death is suicide. They will let themselves be killed and commit suicide because they need to maintain this racial hierarchy. So what kind of help do we need? We need to work together. We need solidarity. We need a wide awake understanding of what's going on, and we need everybody to do their good part. Now, I also say this about attorneys general. you know, Democratic attorneys general are ready to fight. We're fighting on the front lines every day, and I would urge you to meet with your AG in your state to plan a map on what we're going to do to unravel these things, to stand up for ESG, to stand up for DEI, to stand up against inclusive programming, to get them where they can be. But we've got to, this is the activist group. You guys are the ones who aren't just going to study the problem, you're going to do something about that problem. I would say the most important thing you can do is to speak out on your own, link up with others who are fighting, and help harness the power that can be pretty powerful of attorneys general's offices. Right now, we're suing ExxonMobil, the American Petroleum Institute, and Koch Industries because they're lying, because they lied for years and years about the effect of their product on the environment. They could have just told the truth about it, then we could all do something about it. But they had a campaign of lies and deception. Yeah. So who's funding this movement to kill DEI? Who's funding this anti-ESG movement? Yeah. These very people. Yeah. So the bottom line is we need everybody to get moving, understand what the problem is, but mostly understand the critical nature of racial division and separation, because if they can keep us looking at each other suspiciously, they can maintain power structures over us all, which is why we've got to come together and we've got to utilize the powers of each other.
And so we can't end this conversation without hearing from Justin again. And Justin, help us envision what's possible, what's going to happen in Tennessee, why it's going to happen in Tennessee, and why people need to pay attention to and perhaps even be in Tennessee.
Definitely. Well, first of all, you got your cowboy boots on, and so we are ready to come to Nashville because this is the anniversary of Freedom Summer, where people came to the South to stand in solidarity and to act against these systems of white supremacy. And so we're getting ready to have a critical race theory summer school in Nashville, in Tennessee, the tip of the spear, bringing it to the state capitol, bringing it to these spaces of resistance, because the one thing I appreciate about my Republican colleagues is they've made honest why we need it in Tennessee. Tennessee is a state where, serving in committee this year, you had a member, Representative Paul Sherrill, talk about we need to bring back hanging by a tree. You have another member, Justin Lafferty, talking about how the 3/5 compromise was a good thing for black folks. I mean, these are people who are so overt and open in their white supremacy because they think they won't be challenged. So that's precisely the places we need to show up. And so we want to invite you all to come join us, Dr. Crenshaw, Tim, and AG Ellison, always welcome to come down to Nashville, because we want to let them know that we're not going to see this territory, we're not going to run and hide, but we're going to stand up and fight back and reclaim these spaces and stand in that legacy that we know that Tennessee is the birthplace of the KKK, but it's also the birthplace of the Nashville student movement. And without Nashville, we know that many of these civil rights leaders of the 1960s would not exist. In fact, Dr. King, when he came to Nashville, he said, I came to Nashville not to bring inspiration, but to get inspiration for the movement that is happening here. We are the first city that desegregated our lunch counters in the South. We are a city in a state of Ida B. Wells, who said that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. And so there's a lot of hope there. And I really believe that if we continue to stand together, we can create a blueprint of resistance that will help us as we go forward toward 2025, that if we can stop it at the tip of the spear, that it will help us as we look forward in this nation to these threats of fascism and authoritarianism that are very real and very present danger right now.
So if you like what you heard today, you want to roll up your sleeves, you want to hear more, the place to do that is with Justin, with Tim, with Michael Eric Dyson, with several others at CRT Summer School. That's July 28th to August 2nd. You can come in person. You can join us virtually. Not only will you hear from them, but veterans of the SNCC movements, veterans of Freedom Summer. Look, you're going to hear a whole lot about commemorating the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer. You're going to hear about the 70th anniversary of Brown, but we don't want to look backwards and simply celebrate what happened back then. We want to play forward the wisdom that they created, the ability that they created to actually fight for justice. We want to be able to say, we're taking taking these lessons that the faction wants to take away from us and apply it to this moment. One of the key ways to support subordination is to erase our literacy, our ability to speak our reality. If you can't speak a reality, you can't transform it. That's the one thing they understand that we need to understand as well. So if they're trying to take it away from us, if they're trying to take our vote, our power, our knowledge, our wisdom, that's the key for us to hold on to that even more. So that's why we're so excited to be joining with Justin and his colleagues in Tennessee. We hope you join us either in person or virtually. I want to end with just this one quote. People like Martin Luther King. I like Martin Luther King. He has a lot of wisdom for us. One of the things that he's known for saying is that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. My addendum to that is not automatically. It's because people take it and bend it. And that is the objective and the imperative for us. Thank you, Netroots Nation.